Good evening, everyone. So this is the part two of deployments and capturing that we started last weekend. Uh, I had a lot of slides, could not finish most of it. I could only finish about 40%. So let's see. So I'm still in the equipment part of it. I have not gone into the capture part of it at all. So we'll start where we stopped last time. So that's just before getting set up. Yeah. Okay. So we talked about most of the equipments, the mount and the camera and etc. Uh, one of the very important part of astrophotography imaging rig is a guiding setup. So this has something to do with auto guiding. So why do we do it? Primarily because the mount has tracking rate errors. We know something called periodic error, um, that the mount will have uh, it will sometimes track faster, sometimes track slower. On an average, it will track at the rate that you want sidereal. Uh, but it's made of gears, mechanical parts, etc., etc. So the tracking rate will vary. Hence, the star will not be where you really want it. It will move around a bit over time. You could have a little bit of polar misalignment, even though you have done, let's say, polar alignment perfectly. And there is also atmospheric refractions related stuff. Do you understand that star also moves around at a very fast rate due to seeing, or what is known as seeing? But that that kind of movement happens very fast. And the purpose of guiding is not to correct that error. Okay, we cannot chase seeing. We cannot correct a star movement due to that reason. But for the other reasons that are mentioned here, that we need to do guiding, such that for a long exposure, uh, deep sky astrophotography on let's say higher focal length, on a focal length, we need to be able to keep the stars at where it is supposed to be. So typically, guiding establishes a closed loop feedback system in which we watch a star periodically, and then when the star moves every after some time, then we issue a guiding correction. So basically, the algorithm goes like that. You acquire a reference image, determine its position, remember it, then you get another image, then you find out the difference between the position, and then you ask the telescope or the mount to make the corrective movement. So that's how you bring back the star where you're supposed to be.
Hi, Shubhankar. I am Suman. I have a question.
Yes, tell me.
How do you quantify seeing?
We will come to that.
Achha, okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Uh, so typically, auto guiding rig looks like something like this. Like I said, it's a closed loop feedback system. So this is your imaging scope and your primary imaging camera, which is connected to your PC or laptop that you're carrying, all software which is doing the imaging stuff. In addition to primary imaging scope and the camera, you will also have a guide scope and a guide camera. Uh, and that guide camera will also be talking to, will be connected to your PC, and a software, particular guiding software, which will be, using that interface to capture images from the guiding camera. And then it will do the computation mentioned, run this algorithm here, and ultimately ask the guiding camera to issue the corrections to the mount. So this is called ST4, guiding via ST4. This particular connection, which is from the guiding camera to the mount, is usually connected to the something called guide port, or also known as ST4 port of the mount. So this is typically known as auto guiding via ST4 uh, connection. So basically, if you look at the cable, it looks like the old or not old, I mean telephone cable, RJ45 at both ends. Um, that's that's how this is achieved. Another way of interconnecting this is, the guide camera talks to the laptop or PC, and the laptop or PC has a direct connection to the mount. So if you compare with this setup and this setup, here the laptop does not have a direct connection with the mount. It talks to the mount via the guide camera, via the ST4 interface. Whereas the other option that we typically have in the modern mounts, that the mount itself has a interface open to the laptop, which talks ASCOM typically. Uh, Hence, you can do, instead of going via the auto guider and ask it to pass on the guiding commands to mount, you can directly ask the mount to do the guiding correction. This is called pulse guiding or ASCOM pulse guiding. Actually, ASCOM is a set of, it's a interface specification. There's a pulse guiding comes from the fact that the interface function is called pulse guiding. Okay. Uh, this is how typical guiding rig looks like in a piggybacked manner. So this is your primary imaging camera, imaging scope and the camera. And on top of that, in this particular case, we have put a guide camera with a guide scope. Okay. Now, typical recommendations, or typically this is what people popularly use. I have a Orion short tube. This is actually a Orion short tube 80 guide scope, very popular. Um, a lot of people these days uses finder guider setup. Vishwa himself uses one, which has a focal length of about 170, whereas our short tube has a focal length of 400 mm. You may ask, is there a relationship with the the main imaging scope and etc.? There is, but with a shorter focal length guide scope, you can guide up to up to 1200 mm of imaging focal length. So it covers pretty wide area. For the guide camera, there are a few choices I have listed. Very popular one is a Orion SSAG. This is Orion SSAG. I mean, this one is also Orion SSAG. So everywhere you will see, SSAG used as as an example guide camera, but it's a very bad camera. Its sensitivity is really low, and so I suggest you do not buy this at all. I have it, but I don't use it anymore. Uh, but it's cheap and it's popular. Uh, a more expensive but a better guide camera is from the Starlight, and nowadays ZWO range also has it. Uh, Less expensive than Starlight ones, but equally sensitive. You need a sensitive guide camera. I'll explain why. One of the reason is the guide camera, also doubles up as a tool for your polar alignment. And one of the things that you do in the polar alignment is that you point it to horizons, and you need a sensitive camera to pick up a star there. That's one thing. Another thing why we need a sensitive camera is for off-axis guiding. So if you see, this is a dual-axis guiding. So the guide camera is a separate scope, and the main scope is main imaging scope is a different one. What happens is, in case of Newtonian reflectors and etc., there could be differential axis. So this guide camera and the axis of this camera should always remain same. Hence, it's very important how you mount this and how this mount joints are tightened, and they don't have any flex at all. Because when the entire thing is rotating, gravity does what gravity does best, pull things down, and different component can be pulled at a different forces. And what you will have is that axis would change over the duration of guiding. When that happens, what we have a problem called a flex. Uh, it is very common in Newtonian and reflective optics, because the mirror itself can move a little bit. I mean, it's the optics itself can move a little bit due to gravity over time. So hence, if you have a separate guiding rig, that won't know that your star position has changed on the imaging camera because of flexure reasons. So to cancel that, what we do is we don't use a separate guide scope. Rather, we use a setup called off-axis guider. So the idea is in the light path, you put a little prism and take a fraction of the light going to your imaging camera, or take a fraction of it and send it towards the guide camera. So this is how it looks like. This is a scope, and your imaging camera is connected to the scope, and the light is going there. There's a little prism here inside, which is taking a little bit of light and sending it to the guide camera. Since you're not using the entire light or all the stuff, you're only using a tiny part. The chances, and if you're, let's say, you're using a very long focal length, you need to be able to find a star in that tiny area. So this becomes a problem, let's say, when you're trying to shoot galaxy away from Milky Way, and you may or may not have a guide star from, let's say, semi-rural or urban area kind of stuff. Even if you go to dark sky site, I have had a trouble in Coorg, for example, in the Coorg kind of sky. In Arsa Major, I could not see a guide star in the SSAG. That is the time I decided, no, I want to get rid of it and replace it with a much more sensitive guide camera. So this is the reason why you would want to use a sensitive guide camera. Remember, for Newtonian and reflective optics, OAG is the way to go. We do not use a separate guide scope at all. Okay, so that brings me to something called imaging train. This is the most fanciest phrase or jargon I've heard in imaging in the entire astrophotography. Of all the jargons that you will hear, the imaging train is the most interesting one. So what it means, it typically means the sequence of things, that sequence in which you connect your different equipments. So there's a scope, there are some rings, there's a OAG, and then there is some more stuff, and then there's in between there will be some spacers, and ultimately this camera. So as a novice, you might ask, why do I need this spacer? Why can't I just directly get rid of the spacer here and directly connect the camera right behind? Why do I need, why is there a gap here? So all this boils down to a concept called backfocus. So what is backfocus? It's basically a distance between back of any optical element and the focal plane. Okay, so say for example, for all Canon EF lenses, the back focus is a 44 mm. Exactly. So all Canon lenses attaches to the Canon mount at the same place, and all the Canon lenses will focus the whatever light to the DSLR focal plane exactly at 44 mm. So no matter which Canon model, a DSLR model that you talk about, whether it's an entry level or whether it's a 5DX, 1DX or 5D Mark III or etc., all of them, the camera may look bigger and etc., but the focal length is always, the back focus is always 44 mm. So you can actually see, if you see a Canon DSLR from the top view, there is a little mark there where exactly the focal plane is, and you can measure. It will always come out to be 44 mm. So when we buy different kind of optical accessories, like we talked about, you want to have a focal reducer, or you want to have something called fill flattener or a coma corrector. All of these will say in its specification what is its back focus requirement. So fill flattener typically will have 55 mm. Coma correctors usually varies between 55 to 75 mm. So that means if you want to put a coma corrector right here uh, behind the telescope, it has 75 mm. It requires 75 mm from the back of it to the image plane. Uh, the distance between this would be 75 mm. Okay, so that means if you want to put anything else in between, first of all, if you don't want to put anything else in between, that 75 mm needs to be bridged somehow. You can't put the camera right here. It's not going to come to focus. So you have to put the camera 75 mm behind, and you want to bridge that gap somehow by putting spacers. This also means that if you want to put something like a OAG, the width of that OAG cannot be more than 75 mm. Okay, so this puts a trouble. Let's say uh, if we want to use a OAG with Canon lens, with the Canon camera, it's just not possible. There is no space. Okay, now how do we use a T adapter? Let's say, yeah. Uh, how do we connect a DSLR camera to a lens? So there is, we usually connect, you would have heard that we usually connect using a T adapter or T ring. So this is a T adapter and a T ring. This is the called ring and this is called the adapter. Uh, Together they will screw in and put it. So usually with a reflector scope or a reflector, we would use a fill flattener. I've told, which will have a nowadays this is pretty standard, which will have a back focus of 44 mm. So since I said DSLRs require 55 mm fill flatteners or reducer, back focus is 55 mm, and the body of a DSLR itself requires 44 mm. So you have usually 11 mm space available between the camera body. This is where the sensor is somehow, and from the sensor to the, sorry, this probably explains it better. Yeah. So sensor is somewhere here, and from the sensor to the front of the body is 44 mm, and the T-ring is exactly 11 mm. So most standard T-rings in the market that are available are 11 mm. Then you couple that using with a focal reducer or flattener or coma corrector, which will say my back focus is 55 mm. So 55 mm is matched that way. That 11 mm T-ring, 44 mm this distance. So total you get 55 mm. So when you buy your equipments, you need to pay attention to that. If you're going to buy a coma corrector or fill flattener, which is higher than 55 mm, then you need to think, how am I going to use the T-ring, which is of 11 mm, and the Canon DSLR is 44 mm, and let's say this is a 60 mm back focus requirement, then you need to put a 5 mm spacer here somehow. So all these concepts taken together is known as imaging train, and you need to think about buying things properly. So here is an example of using MPCC, multi-purpose coma corrector for Newtonian Bader, which is very popular, being used with a DSLR. Now, along with an OAG, the OAG itself is 10 mm thick, and the MPCC has a back focus of 55 mm. So if you want to put 11 mm T-ring, 11 plus 10 plus 44 is not equal to 55. So what you need to look for in the market is that a thinner T-ring. There's actually a thinner T-ring available which is of 1 mm in some places, and it will advertise like that. And so you use that 1 mm thin T-ring along with this particular OAG, and then you put the MPCC. So the buying decisions, when you go shopping, you may find all these things, informations in the specifications, and you need to really think and judge how you're going to put the stuff. Okay, I'm going to rush over all these things and spend more time some of the important stuff that I wanted to discuss today. So one of the important thing that we use is dew heater. Dew is a common problem. Uh, comes Dew heaters comes with a dew strap and a controller. So you would put the dew strap around your scope, and typically it will go into a dew controller, and ultimately you'll power up the dew controller from your power source. So dew controller works by having a duty cycle. In that duty cycle it will change send power through the strap, and it will heat up just a few degrees maybe, and that's good enough to get the dew out of the way. So here is an example with a dew strap. Understand that where we put it, it needs to be put at the junction of the dew cap and where the primary objective is. So that's where the objective is to hit the area right above the primary objective. We don't want to hit the optical tube. We don't want to go behind it. Okay, you don't want to hit the air inside the tube at all. You want to hit the air, just outside the primary objective. That's where you want to put the dew strap. You get even for camera. This is for the ASI. I never used it, but it's available in a colder country, in the colder temperature. Things can dew up there as well, or a very humid places. Now we come to how do we mount different kind of stuff on a mount. So usually there are two types of mounting. The one is called Lost-Mandy type or D type. One is called Vixen type or V type. So you need to check what kind of mounting does your scope require, and what kind of mounting uh, does your mount actually provides. So for example, in this particular case, this is a newer model of Atlas. Uh, it comes with, oh no, so this is not probably from the Skywatcher themselves. This is an aftermarket one. So in this aftermarket one, it can accept both D type or the wider V type kind of mounts. This is an important thing because if you want to put a heavyweight stuff, for example, my 10-inch f4 scope, at the bottom it has a D type plate. It's wider, it's much more solid than a thin V type one. So I had to change my top mounting on my Atlas so that it can take both V type and D type. V types are used for the smaller scopes when I want to use smaller scopes, a camera, etc. But when I want to use my 10-inch f4, that has a D type plate at the bottom. In addition to things, you need something like this kind of rings to put your scope in, or this comes in different flavors. Some come with a screw or a provision to put a piggyback another scope or another item on top. Some don't. So when you go to shop and do your buying decisions, you really need to think about how do I really connect. Some of these are not obvious from the looking at the photos and the pictures. So you really need to ask around and ask the right questions, or look at people who have bought such stuff, look at their images, and probably then you will know. Because I have made a lot of mistakes. I bought by looking at the picture, and then when the things came, I figured out, no, that's not enough. I need to buy another plate. I need to buy another ring. I need to buy another socket or screw or something like that. So every time I need to buy the decision, it's all buying from abroad. It means shipping. It means customs. It means cost. Nowadays, you do get such stuffs in India, but still, it pays to be know how we are going to ultimately put things together. So one of the popular configuration is side by side. So where it looks like this. There's a V type bar or D type bar, and on top of that there are two mounting side by side. So here on one side you can put your main scope, another side you can put your guide scope. and then the entire assembly goes onto the mount, like here. Uh, the same thing which has gone onto the mount. It's a this guy has put a little bit of balancing thing also, which you may or may not require. You have to try and see. This works very good if you're going to use a camera or a refractor with a guide scope, but this kind of stuff is not recommended for Newtonian. You'll never be able to balance properly. And first of all, and secondly, the guide scope is not recommended for Newtonian at all. You should use a OAG route. Some more images. Now, how do you mount a telescope? Sorry, a camera lens. There is, you get this V-type V-type or D-type bar with a screw, and you should use a lens collar to mount it. Never mount on the camera directly. It will cause a little bit of flex, which you do not want. Apart from small lenses like 50 mm, where you cannot, there is no space to put a ring or a collar, so that probably you will have to use. There you have to use directly mount on the camera. Even in that case, we use a ball head. Okay, so that brings me to power in the field. So it's another puzzle all the time, and I'm still battling this puzzle even after so many years. So we must use batteries for the mount, to run the mount all night, for the camera and for the laptop if possible. You do not want to power. You don't want to use socket power or electricity for these two things, at least because the power cut is pretty common and happens. And even if that is not common and you have, let's say, power backup, and you're in a star party environment, people can trip over wires and you can lose power uh, due to accidents like that. And hence, you don't want the mount losing power is a very, very difficult situation to recover from. You have to manually move it to pole and etc. etc. And every time you touch the mount, there is a risk of losing the polar alignment. So we want to run everything from, at least the mount and the camera from batteries all the time. So if possible, entire rig should be on battery. So how do you know how much battery is required? So you essentially look at the specification of each of the equipment that you're using and calculate the total amps that require, and then multiply by hours of usage, and then you double it. I'll explain why you need to double it. Some of the options for marine dip cycle batteries, marine dip cycle is very popular in the Western countries, and that is the most recommended battery type so far for astro users, because you can deep drain it. But these are liquid, and you have to put the water in, and difficult to carry around. You have to be very careful handling them. So hence, in India, the better options are sealed maintenance-free ones. But the problem with SMF batteries is you cannot drain it beyond the 50%. So this is the reason I have been using SMF for so many years and still use. And this is the reason why we double it. Your total amps age required for your battery, you need to provision double that amount, because you do not want to drain any of the battery more than that. It just reduces the life of the battery. Lithium ions these days are available, but it's not always reliable. There are instances of it catching fire and bursting and stuff like that. The new range of battery that is coming up now in these times, in the last 2 years, and it's growing popularity every day, is lithium iron phosphate. It is for the same amount of age, the weight is pretty low. It has a large number of duty cycles. So basically, the number of recharge cycles, number of recharges that you can do is pretty high, and you can dip drain to a large extent. Up to 80% I'm given to understand. But right now it is quite costly compared to lithium ions. But I'm hoping that the cost will come down and the production will be, this will be available like just like the SMFs are available everywhere someday. And finally, you need a laptop uh, to control everything. Having a high-speed USB ports or powered hub is highly required and recommended. If you have a SSD, it's good. Go for a smaller screen. You don't need a 14-inch or 15-inch laptop in the field. A smaller screen laptop will actually last longer in the for the battery that it has. There used to be one brand of laptops which used to be quite popular for the purpose of our thing. Think I'm forgetting the name now. Few softwares which we commonly use in deep sky astrophotography, ASCOM based platforms and the drivers. Nowadays everything connects over ASCOM. Your mount, your camera, your dew, even the dew hitters, your filter wheel, your focusers, everything talks ASCOM, and you can have one software to control all the different equipments.
Shubhankar,
PhD2 is what
typically,
we use for guiding, auto guiding setup, and it also, like I said, that your entire guiding setup doubles up for polar alignment. So we use that for polar alignment also. CDC is what I use for start chart, mount pointing, slew, and sync. So basically, if I want wherever I want to go in the sky, I just fire up the CDC and ask it to type in the object name and ask it to go. So the CDC would be talking to the mount via ASCOM. For capturing, uh, there are many tools. Choose the one that you like. I like astrophotography too, and I've been using it for a long time. It can control DSLR, CCD, CMOS. It can do plate solving. It has focus control. It has filter wheel control. Everything in one place to the extent. Uh, for all the stuff that I need, it suffices and it's quite cheap. For plate solving, if you're interested, AstroTortia is the thing to go. Now, APT actually has its own by a third-party interface, of course, provides two, right now actually three, the latest version had come yesterday. So three different plate solving engine within APT itself, I mean through APT itself. AstroTortia is also another program which talks to APT for capturing purpose of it. Uh, AstroTortia is something that I learned first, even before I started using APT. So that's the one I stick to usually. You need some sort of image viewers for CO2. Even if you're using DSLR, your capturing tool actually will show the image, but it may not do in case of, let's say, if you're using OSC kind of CCT or CMOS, you need to do debayering and etc. So it may not do it as the some of the image processing software does. So I use PixInsight itself for debayering and or just stretch an image and see how it is and etc. So a little bit of processing on field, little bit of processing. It's not nowhere near processing an image for publishing. It's just to see how things are. Okay, so now we'll get into capturing and more interesting stuff. So any questions at this point?
Hi, Subhankar. Typically, how many USB ports do you need for
I
the
need four, right? With a particular equipment is still stuck in custom, I'm going to need five. So I need four because one connects to the mount, one connects to the guide camera, one connects to my imaging camera, and the fourth one is a joystick, which basically talks to my ASCOM program for mount. So the hand control basically doubles up for hand controller. I don't use a hand controller in my mount, so I have so the cable directly goes to the mount serial port. Uh, So those are the four in my case. If I'm using another piggyback camera, I'm going to need more ports. The fifth one that I'm talking about, I'm going to need that's for focus control. So I want to be able to control the focus through my software. So that's another one you need. So far I have been lucky to have a laptop which has four ports. Even this laptop from where I'm right now talking, it's a 8-year-old laptop, but it has four ports.
Shubhankar, so for the filter wheel, how do you connect it to the automated filter wheel?
I didn't understand. The
Uh,
filter wheel actually connects to the camera, ZWO camera that I use. that has a hub inside it. So it has two ports, that you can use from the camera. Do I have a picture? Just a second. I think I have a picture of ZWO backside. So you see here, this is the USB that goes to the camera, and there are two ports here, which you can use to connect the to filter wheel. Another port you can use to connect it to focuser.
oh,
That is ZWO focuser.
okay.
So basically, it has a hub on its body. So if you nowadays there are options uh, available in the market where there are many things. You can in a little box. It provides hub. It provides power connections. It provides things like that. It provides wireless control and everything in one box. Uh, so you put that box somehow on the mount, and from that box you connect all the things that requires USB. You connect to that box, and from that box either you can connect your laptop over Wi-Fi, or you can draw a cable. So one cable from the box to your laptop, and from that box all other cables to different places. So that's a but that box requires power because etc. If you're going to use a USB hub, you can also use a USB hub, but you should use a powered USB hub, and you must be powering that from battery. So so that becomes a challenge actually. Getting how to power a USB hub from battery becomes a little bit of tricky thing. There are few options in the Astro world where there are USB hubs available, which takes power from a 12-volt battery, but not in the normal market. You can go and search in Amazon, you'll not get any. Plus, I mean, unless you're ready to do some engineering of your own.
I have a question.
Yeah,
This is about dew heaters.
yeah.
How do you determine the temperature you need to leave your dew heaters at when you're imaging?
The controllers has no I so far ran it in the default setting that it came, and it never caused me a problem.
No, because the controllers have this setting from high to low, but there is no way to understand temperature, right?
No, it just you don't need a temp. See, there is usually a temperature sensor that it comes with. Okay, so it senses the temperature, and then automatic dew controller. What it will do is it will vary the duty cycle,
Okay.
and it will keep the temperature higher than what is the ambient temperature that is sensing.
Okay, but this is with the temperature sensors, but there are certain controllers which don't have the temperature
So
sensor.
then you have to depends on the duty cycle. You can increase the duty cycle or decrease the duty cycle.
Yeah, so this mechanism where it's just a small left to right movement,
Yeah.
like there is high, medium, and low.
Yeah. So you see, you first of all, you don't need huge temperature changes. Okay, you
You're
need
right.
only a couple of degrees, and so you need to. I don't have an answer perfectly. So I would go by experience. So I will
Okay.
try out and see, and if it works, good. If it does not work, okay, I'll increase it and etc. So these are the things to do on a full moon night.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so going to get into capturing now. Okay. So before we get into the core stuff, how to capture DSOs and et cetera, workflow, et cetera, there are a few things we want to discuss. One is seeing an image scale. These are very important concept to understand before you get into imaging. So, you can search and understand. So I'm going to go over a little bit fast on this. So if you want to understand in details, there are many resources you can find on all these topics. And plus you can also ask questions if you have. So your optics and a camera ultimately decides the field of view that that the focal plane or your sensor is going to see. And so there is a formula like this where you can calculate the field of view in arc minutes. So for arc seconds, just multiply this with 60 again. So image scale is nothing but your field of view divided by the number of pixels. For example, for my 300 mm f2.8 using a Canon 500D has an image scale of 3.23 arc seconds per pixel. So what that means is for every pixel in that camera, I am seeing a sky of that much, 3.23 arc seconds. So full moon is half a degree with half a degree wide, and a degree has a 60 arc minutes, and every arc minute has a 60 arc seconds. So 3.23 arc seconds of amount of sky I'm seeing in per pixel on the sensor of the 500D when used with this particular optics. So if you keep the camera same and increase the focal length, you would basically have smaller arc second per pixel. Now, why knowing this is important is basically, something called seeing. Understand that we are imaging from Earth, which has an atmosphere around us. We're not imaging from the outside the atmosphere. We are imaging from within the atmosphere on the ground. Okay, and seeing is also measured in arc seconds. Now, how it is measured and etc. You'll find details that are very technical actually. So essentially, if seeing, let's say it's 2 arc seconds, what it means is the star would jump around within a 2 arc second field. So basically, whatever it is, whatever the stars are supposed to be point source of light. Doesn't matter what the brightness is. Every star is a point source of light. So, and if you compare with the moon's width, moon's angular width of half a degree, etc., the stars are much smaller than an arc second. So, but when it comes and hits, when you take the image of it, so the light from it, it's going to come via the stack of column of air, and it's going to get splattered around. So because of that, so ultimately it will not become a point source of image on your sensor. Rather, it will be splattered around. Okay, is that point clear? So instead of having a point dot, you will have a round, splattered around image on your sensor. So, and that is determined by the seeing condition under which you are imaging. So some of the best seeing are available in the high altitude dry areas like the Atacama Desert, where there are a line of many professional quality, professional grade telescopes. Large telescopes are situated, and if you see what is common between the locations of all such telescopes, it will be usually high altitude and a dry area over a calm sort of water or such body where the seeings are really good. And Prabhu Kutty actually explained why he has a nice graphic in what kind of terrestrial conditions the seeings are better and etc. So in those places you get a seeing of 0.4 arc seconds, really good. For us mortal entities, common human beings, when we are imaging, typically if you are lucky, then we get a seeing of 2 to 4 arc seconds. If you're really lucky, These days, actually in Bangalore, I found a site in which it is actually showing me the expected seeing conditions. I don't know how correct that are, those data are, but these days I'm seeing that site is saying that we have a 1 arc second seeing these days in Bangalore. So there comes a theory. Then if you want to sample uh, something which is being spattered around by 2 to 4 arc seconds, your sampling rate has to be half of that. So that means the number of pixels you require to correctly capture data in that which is getting splattered around in 2 to 4 seconds should be half of that. So that means the imaging scale in which you should be imaging for mortal entities, for amateurs, where the seeing is 2 to 4 arc seconds, the imaging scale should be around that level, 1 or 2 arc seconds per pixel. Now there is a spin ball here. The pixels are square, but the star that you're capturing is round, and hence to have a little more width, and you really want to make the star round. Uh, this rule is relaxed a bit nowadays in the modern times to say 1/3 on the lower side to half on the higher side. Essentially, basically 2/3 instead of 2/2 to 4/2. So it basically results in a 0.67 to a couple of arc seconds per pixel is the recommended imaging scale in which you should be imaging. Now, what happens uh, when your imaging scale is outside this range? So let's say your imaging scale is really high. What will happen is you're basically doing an undersampling. Uh, Undersampling happens when you have less number of arc seconds per pixel. Sorry, less number of more number. So your you don't have enough pixel to capture the light splattering that is happening for the star. Hence, your star is going to look like a blocky and etc. There's not enough pixel to capture the details of the star. So when this happens, your sensitivity of your imaging system actually reduces because if your pixels are so large that you're not able to cover the data from the star. So whatever matters for the star also matters for every other thing, whether it's a galaxy arm or a nebula or the wisp in the nebula, it matters for that as well. So we are talking in terms of star, understand that it matters for other things as well. So basically, along with the starlight, you see the sky background also gets in. So in effect, effectively, you're losing sensitivity, or your image is going to look like it's not captured enough data. What happens to the other side? When you have too many arc second per pixel, or your arc second per pixel is really low. So in that case, your star is going to cover over more number of pixels. So in other words, it actually causes the bloating of the star. Not only that, at such a small arc second per pixel, and a high focal length, your required guiding accuracy and your tracking accuracy also increases. It's, in case of visual astronomy, we say that there is a surface brightness concept and the power you should be using to view that particular galaxy or whatever you are viewing. So there is a constant amount of light, let's say that's coming, and you go high power. So basically that light gets splattered over a wider area. So this is something like that happens here. The light that is coming, now you are capturing it with too many pixels. So essentially, you're splattering that light over a larger area. In other words, again, your sensitivity reduces. So in this case, the recommendation is to back off a bit and increase your arc second per pixel, so to come to the right value, so that you get better capturing of data, similar to what we would recommend in a visual case, that you reduce your power, go wider a bit, and you'll probably see things better. Same thing applies here as well. So there is a nice chart I found from a tech website, where actually it lists uh, what is your pixel size of your camera along with the focal length that you're using. So, so the red data or red columns and the cross sections are around the range of 1 to 2 arcsecond per pixels. And if you are higher this side, you are basically undersampling, and if you're on this side, you're basically oversampling. So accordingly, so you choose. I'm going to use a 600 scope, and so there are your options to options for a camera are these. You will not choose this camera, which essentially makes you go undersampling. Okay. Any questions? Somebody had a question on seeing. Have I answered that or?
Yeah, I've understood now. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Shubhankar, one question.
yeah.
So you said, so in the previous slide, you said you have to change the image scale. No, the previous one where you were showing the stars. So in case of oversampled or undersampled, you have to change the imaging scale. But usually that is not possible, right? Because you
Yeah,
have
you
the...
can. No, not always. In some cases, you can. So if you're on a lens and a DSLR, there are options are very few. You can't really do much. But then lens and the DSLR going that smaller image scale is really not possible. What is the biggest focal length you can use practically without burning down the bank? But in other cases, for example, here, you can use a focal reducer oversampling case. Okay. And that will bring down your arcsecond per pixel. You can also start binning in a CCD camera. That will also bring down your arcsecond per pixel. So there are options that you can exercise.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what is the relation of image scale or oversampling or undersampling with printing images?
Printing images.
Yes.
I don't think there is any relationship. I can't think of any relationship. So if you want to go pixel picking, see, printing is a different concept altogether. So that's processing. So once you have processed your image, but to be able to print that onto a media, you first have to do something called what is the term? I'm forgetting. So there, basically, you have to match the PPI, or what is it called?
DPI, right?
Yeah, DPI, dots
Yes.
per inch.
Yes.
So there, typically we publish our images in sRGB color space with a 72 DPI kind of resolution. So these things are controllable. So if you want to go for printing, you have to go for 300 DPI, number one.
Okay.
Okay, so that's processing altogether. This is if of course if you want to go pixel picking and you want to print whatever you captured is a very wide photo, and you don't want to see pixels in them, then you must have enough pixels. Okay.
Okay.
That's pretty much guaranteed. But I don't think other than that things are that related. So if you want to really print it, so what, let's say this guy has done, Rogelio. So he has this image of Uran region, or was it Vargo region? Kitty can tell probably, where he has joined several images. It's called mosaic.
Right.
Oh no, sorry, the Ursa Major, the IFN. So it's basically done. You can increase your megapixels of your image by doing mosaics. Okay, and then you have a very huge megapixel image, which you can print in a 6 feet by 6 feet kind of print.
Okay.
Okay, but the same field you can take, let's say, in a 100 focal length, and then that, no matter what kind of processing you do, and you want to print it on a 6 feet by some feet, it's going to look shabby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I think also it depends on whether you're seeing the image from close by, or whether it's on a billboard and you're seeing it from a far distance. So printing for billboard is different from printing in a gallery and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So capturing, any more questions? No. Okay. So before I proceed, I just give a little bit intro. I'm not going to go deep into it. A couple of things. One is the frame types. What kind of frames do we capture in the field? The lights, the actual photo, the signal, the data, whatever you call it. We decide some exposure. Uh, you know, uh, this comes by practice or some maths. As long as you need to collect enough data per frame, how many, as long as you think your SNR is going to, you need, or number of images that you need to achieve your required SNR level, which is dictated by the sky conditions and etc. Then there is something called darks. It is same exposure at the same as lights, but only contains the thermal noise and signal from the sensor. You cover the scope, and you would ensure no light leakage. I would just highlight on the no light leakage part of it. If you're shooting using DSLR, remember to cover the back, the viewfinder. A lot of people don't do it, and a lot of people think it's not required. I have personally done an experiment to see amount of light leakage happens just through that viewfinder. Um, I it's not just about when you're taking darks, it's also when you're taking lights. I don't want any lights other than the light that I'm supposed to capture to enter the camera. So I even cover during capturing of the lights. Uh, what will you use to cover it? Look at the little thing in the camera belt that you got. That is what you use to cover that particular stuff. Then we capture something called flats. It is to basically to process the uneven illumination of your field due to vignetting or dust motes, which could be on the sensor or on the optics. So when you take flats, uh, your focus must be same as that of lights. Bias, fastest exposure by definition, fastest exposure possible on the camera. Uh, it's similar to dark, like you have the scope or the camera covered. Now, one important question here is at what temperature should I collect all these things? The light, in case of DSLR. In case of CCD or CMOS with the cooled take cooling or set point cooling, everything should be taken at the same temperature. That's what I do. Uh, Actually, don't. There is no need to collect bias for CMOS CCD at all, because the everything else, every data has bias in itself, and during the processing bias would get cancelled. But for DSLR, bias becomes very important, and Kitty would probably explain it in his session, that we need to subtract the bias signal first, and then the dark and the thermal signals can be what is it called, scaled. It's called dark scaling, because in case of DSLR, it is near impossible to capture everything at the same temperature. Your temperature vary. Uh, Typically, at this time of year in Bangalore, when I start imaging, it would be 31C. The frames, by the time I stop imaging, it would be at 39C. So my lights will vary from being at 31C to 39C. So will my darks, and so will my flats, etc. So you want to scale the darks to match the noise level in the lights. To be able to do that, the bias signals must be subtracted first, and then only the dark scaling can be applied. So if you're using DSLR, you need bias, and you need bias. You need that bias to be characterized very accurately. So the recommendation is to collect bias in the range of 200 plus. That's what I do. Whereas the flats and the darks can be in the range of 30 to 50, typical typical recommendations. But the typical recommendations also says the bias should also be 30 odd. No, 30 odd bias does not help. Okay. One last topic before we get into the interesting part of capturing. What is signal to noise ratio? So, without getting into the too much technical details, it is basically signal over noise. That's all. So, the objective of making an astrophotography is to reduce signal to noise ratio to during the capture part as much as possible. So, like I said, the capturing equipment and the processing all go hand in hand. It's a triad. So what you do in processing comes from what you have captured, and what you're going to capture would be what you think you're going to do during the processing. So the questions like how many subs should I collect, how should I take the darks, and should I take the bias or not? All these decisions are actually based on the concept, what is going to be my SNR. So objective is to reduce, aim as high an SNR as possible. So there are, obvious two ways to do it. Either you can boost your signal or reduce your noise. So signal can be boosted, by stacking more images, or increasing your exposure, or lowering your f ratio, thereby getting more light to hit your sensor, or using a better camera with a better QE. QE means quantum efficiency. It's basically each photon convert to how many electrons and the data. So, or you can try to reduce noise. Noise essentially, your thermal noise. You go cool it, get a better camera, image from a darker sky, so that your the short noise or the wideband noise is also reduced. You can go narrowband, so that you've got the light pollutions completely away, and you have only the data that you require, etc. So at the time of when you're thinking of capturing a particular object, so your decisions or your planning or your strategy depends on multiple of this. So how many should I stack? It depends on the object. It's how bright it is, what kind of sky that you're going to image from, what should be your exposure. That will define how many to stack, and etc. etc. So the question that everybody asks, so how many images stacking, how many images is really required? So we know that noise reduces at the square root of the number of images taken. So if you've taken 4 images, your noise is going to be half. If you're taking 25 images, your noise is going to be 1/5. And so there is at some point it goes flat, and that flat point in modern times is somewhere around 200 to 300 images. So it sounds high, but it's really that. That's where, so that is the point where to get one more decrement of SNR requires to stack 1,000 more images. So you don't want to go there. But if you don't want to go to 200, 300, you can be satisfied with 100 and all. But I personally never satisfied with 30 odd and 60 odd. So I have seen what really good images, good number of images can do to your processing needs. Don't take my suggestions too seriously. It's supposed to be fun. If you're happy with taking 30 lights, continue to take 30 lights. Not a problem.
Okay, I have a question here.
Yeah.
Now, supposing you only had 1 hour or 1.5 hours of imaging time on a particular target.
Yeah, it happens most of the time.
Yes. So in this case, you could do two things. You could have longer exposures and lesser shots, or you could have shorter exposures and higher number of shots.
And actually, that doesn't matter. What matters is the total time, and total time is still going to be 1.5 hours.
Right.
Okay. So whether should you go for longer exposure versus shorter exposure depends on your sky globe. Okay.
Okay.
So there is a theory which says that your exposure should be sky fog limited.
Okay.
you do not want every photon to become white with the sky glow, and it reaches the white point. There's no fun in processing that.
Okay.
So your exposure should be sky fog limited. There are ways to calculate how much is the sky fog, and you want to limit the exposure to that. Your exposure could also be read noise limited. So you don't want, as longer you expose, your noise also increases.
Right.
Okay, thermal. So you want to have a strategy in which it says, I don't want to expose more than that.
Okay.
For example, with my ASI 1600, I use it a high gain for doing narrow bands with a semi-light polluted, semi-rural sky. So the recommendation there is to go high gain and shorter exposure.
Okay.
Okay. So because at the high gain, the read noise is very low, the shorter exposure, like 1 or 2 minutes, the stars are saturated. So you take lots of exposure to increase, to go to that total amount of data, which
Okay.
should be in the range of 8 hours.
Okay.
Okay. For my particular imaging conditions, which is light polluted, semi-rural light polluted sky, and I'm doing narrowband. So these are
Okay.
the conditions in which the recommendation is to go 8 hours to gather 8 hours of data using the ASI 1600.
No, I understood that, but
Okay.
my question was, now if you just had 1.5 hours and you were stacking, so going by what you said about stacking.
I'm answering that. So
Okay.
so whether to go for longer exposure, shorter exposure is defined by the sky glow and other factors. So whatever you do, let's say you just have a 1.5 hour exposure. The only other thing that you can do is to do multi-night imaging.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So so you're not going to get 8 hours of data in one night. So fine. So you whatever your strategy, whether it's a long exposure but versus short exposure, you collect 1.5 hour of data tonight. You collect 1.5 hour data tomorrow night if you can go. And in my case, seriously speaking, every project that I now take up is a multi-year project
All
because
right.
I cannot complete a single object in a year. There are only 10 nights that I can go out on an average, of which only 5 nights are good.
Right.
Yeah. So that's life.
Yeah. All right.
Subhankar,
Yes.
is there any method of cooling ordinary cameras like Canon 1300 or something like that? You suggest some method or something?
Is Doc here? Doc has tried a lot of things. You make a box out of thermocol and then put dry ice in it and stuff like that. And like I said in the last talk last week, I don't know if you were there. There are people like JTW Astronomy or Central DS in China who have actually dismantled the entire camera as it looks like. Just taken the hardware and put their own packaging with a cooler and etc. etc. So and
Doctor,
for the if you are really do it yourself kind of guy and you've got the guts and you've got the tools and you've got the knowledge and you've got the hand, and then you can do cooling by yourself. There are, I think, just like the modification instructions are available on the net, there are people who have also done take cooling of a DSLR camera by themselves, but it's a heavy engineering.
I'm working on an external cooling mod.
Okay, good. Let us know how it works.
Yeah, definitely. I will share the results.
yeah, doctor had made a what is it? PC cooling setup, Peltier cooling setup, which was with me, and now I think it's with Prithvi. So yeah, we can see how to get to that.
Yeah, the primary challenge here is not the cooling. Probably you will get there after a fight, but it is to control the dew or the fogging of the stuff. So that's where that lot of challenges comes from. Even the ASI guys, if with that experience and etc., they solved it only after only in the 4th version of ASI camera. I don't have a much of a problem because I'm not not going to shoot from a cold and a high humidity conditions. But if you're going to shoot from a cold and high humidity conditions, then that problem shows up even in ASI camera version 3. So I think only in the 4th version they have solved by directing some of the cooler, the hotter air into the air window. So that's why the dew strip that you saw is required. So in case of a DSLR mod with a tech cooling, that becomes one of the primary problems. If you have solved it, good. Okay, I'll just go to toilet and come back. Just give me 2 minutes. Okay. So next we talk about planning the night. This is very important, and when I get deeper into the capturing workflow and process and things, that I would be touching some of these aspects. So before you get out of your house and you want to go capture something, research your targets, and you should have multiple targets in your mind. And if you're carrying multiple objectives, like multiple scopes, that you should have, if I don't get this one, what am I going to get? Because sometimes by experience, after a few years, you would know which subject is how bright and etc. But your sky conditions and your seeing conditions and this etc. Some of the stuffs you're only going to find out once you're at the site. And then you have to take a decision, should I really go for that galaxy or should I really stick to Horsehead? Okay. So for me, like I said, I get to go out only 10 days in a year, out of which 5 nights are good and the other 5 nights are washed out for some reason or the other. So I don't really want to come back empty-handed. So for me, planning the night, when I go out, I really plan. This is what I primarily want to target. This is my secondary target. This is the time I want to do polar align. This is the time the target is going to rise. This is the time the target is going to cross meridian. Why is that important? In a perfect world, you want to shoot 2 hours east of meridian to 2 hours west of meridian. That is the time it is passing through the darkest portion of the sky. No matter its height. So if you can shoot at the zenith, it's good. But that is the time it is at the highest altitude with respect to the ground. What FOB is image scale appropriate setup to use? What kind of exposure length? I go and check, who has done similar imaging using the similar setup that I have done. What kind of results they have obtained, what kind of sub-exposure they have used, what kind of gain offset ISO they have used, etc., and why they have used. In some cases, people actually go and detail. For example, for ASI, I go and look up what John Resta has used. He is one of the very knowledgeable people using this camera. He had given so much of GAN on the Cloudy Nights forum. So I go and search his talks about what kind of exposures should be used for what kind of targets. So before you head out, collimate your scope. If you're using Newtonian, it's very important that you do your collimation to as perfectly as possible at home. So the target should be to do it at home perfectly. Then when you carry it, collimation will go off a bit, but it's not going to go off so much that you need to do it again from the scratch in the dark. In the dark, collimation is really tough and dangerous. So there you only want to make little bit of changes to make it perfect. But the majority of collimation should be done at home. You don't want to do that at site in the dark. If you're using an OAG and if you're using the OAG setup for the first time, or things have changed, I am of the opinion that I do not dismantle my equipment to bits, such that I have to set up from the very beginning again. So using OAG, the problem is you have to align the guide camera with your main camera so that they both come to focus at the same time. because there is only one focuser well. Using that, you would you would focus the main camera. At the same time, the guide camera should also come to focus. Now, in the dark, doing this is difficult. Plus, if you're in a star party environment, you need to really see things, and people are not going to like the lights. Um, Even if you're using a headlamp and that red, it is red and etc. Um, it's not you're going to disturb people. So basically, and plus it is difficult. So at home, doing it at the daytime, and then carry the setup, or you make a marker. You know exactly the focus positions or the positions where you're going to plug it in and how you're going to plug it in. Everything worked out, and you do whatever works with you. You put a tape or use a marker pen to mark it, or in my case, for the first time I used OAG, I set up everything. I took the entire assembly out of the focuser, put it in the towel, and took it like that. So update software, PhD guide, for example, keeps fixing things. So check your weather. It will also tell you, particularly what you are looking at as seeing kind of stuff. And of course, if there's going to be cloud, which even if it says that there is not going to be cloud, it can get cloudy, by the way. Yeah. So workflow, once you reach the field, you don't need to do it in this order, by the way, but this is a general recommendation of order, and depending on your equipments, this order would change a bit. You want to do certain things before and do the certain things afterwards. So you set up your equipments, level and balance and power up and put all your cabling. You do a rough polar alignment to the extent possible. I'll touch upon this later. You want to collimate your scope. Once you're done with your polar alignment, that is the fine collimation. But before you want to collimate your scope, if you're carrying a Newtonian and actually for any OTA for that matter, you want to take that OTA out of your car or out of your wherever and leave it while you're setting up the equipment with its the cover, everything removed flat on the ground or flat on the table or chair or whatever you want to cool the optics. So then we focus, then we set up an auto guiding and calibrate the same thing. Then we slew to the target. We want to do plate solving to center it. Then we compose, rotate, align, and then we set up dithering. Then we start guiding and pick correction, and then we start the exposure. In the end, we take flats. Like I said, these things can change. In my case, for example, I take flats before I start imaging. So as soon as I've done focusing, I take flats right there. I don't want to take flats in the morning. I use a flat panel, and waking up in the morning to take flats is really disturbing to me. So I take flats, and that's where the job is done. Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, you need to cool your optics, setting up the equipment. Okay. Do a rough polar alignment, load all your blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is pretty much. Why do you need to level your mount? There are actually, technically speaking, level your mount and polar alignment is not really related. You can still be polar aligned with the mount not perfectly leveled, but usually if your leveling is too off, then your altitude correction will introduce error in azimuth and vice versa. So you don't want to do that. You have to level your mount to the extent possible, which is why a bubble level on the mount itself is so necessary. Balance your load. I have included a YouTube link which you can go see, and I'm not really describing how to balance your load, how to balance in REM, how to balance in DEC, etc. Typically, we want to keep the balancing east heavy, so that the motor actually has the mount is really lying on the motor, and it's pushing for tracking rather than the other way.
By this, you mean the counterweights are heavier, right?
No, whatever is pointing, whatever is in the east
Okay.
side.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, got it. Got it. Yeah.
So if you're going to shoot, so this is a bit of a problem because sometimes you need to do experiments as to how much further you need to push your counterweight down or up uh, if you're going to switch the side, which you are going to if you're going to shoot, let's say 2 hours from meridian and 2 hours of after meridian, if that kind of shooting, and you want to do meridian flip, so then your side changes. Um, and one of the things at that time, what you want to do is that you want to make whatever in the east is heavier. So either that would require your counterweights to be shifted or and stuff. So instead of figuring out later in the night by how much you want to shift, it is better to know that amount when you're setting up the equipment. By practice, you will know. If you're going to use the same equipments over and over, you'll know exactly here. This is balanced for my need pointing west, and exactly here this is balanced for my need when pointing east. So yeah, you understood, right?
Yes. Yes. Very
Yeah.
much.
So whatever is the pointing east has to be heavier by a tiny bit. So we get into really interesting topic now. Any questions before I get there? How are you doing? You're not doing very well in terms of time.
I had a question on setting up dithering.
We are going to talk about dithering
Okay.
if we
Okay, no
get time.
No problem.
If we don't get time, again, it's probably going to be tomorrow.
Okay.
So polar alignment. Let's start it. I don't have to describe what is polar alignment. I hope everybody, each one of us knows what is the polar alignment, why we need to polar align. Okay, so this is no matter what kind of equatorial mount that you're using. And before you get into your really rigorous polar alignment routine, and no matter what that routine is, while it is still day, sunset has happened, but the sky is not yet dark, you do a rough polar alignment. If you're at the site for the very first time, use your compass and the sky chart on the phone to find out where the pole star is supposed to be. Ask around, somebody might know who has come to the site before, or if you have gone to the site, you know where exactly the pole star comes. Um, you do as close as possible. The altitude markers on your mount, set it to the correct altitude, get as close as possible. It helps you. You cannot do polar alignment by any method if you're off by, let's say, 30 degrees. Okay, then you have to change after. Remember, it's dark when you find out that you're off by 30 degrees, or huge, uh, and you have to now change the tripods. I mean, change the entire setup, which could be really heavy, and you have put up all your OTA, etc., etc. You level, you balance, all the stuffs are done. Now you find out that you're off by so many degrees. It's not good. So when you're starting to polar align, and while it is still day, you should be close. Uh, uh, I'm not asking you to be close by a couple of degrees and etc. It could be probably 5 degrees, but don't be off by a huge margin. Uh, Now, when darkness happens, now you want to do the polar alignments. I'm not going into the some mounts these days have their own polar alignment routine. Frankly speaking, I have no knowledge of that. I've never used, but somebody like Vishwa can explain. Celestron, I think, has something called ASPA. Is that right, Tom? Uh,
Correct. It's called All-Star Polar Alignment.
Yeah. So it has its own routine to do polar alignment. I have no idea how it works. Vishwa can explain. Some kind of polar alignment device plus software plus your mount itself might come with a polar alignment scope. Use all that method to get closer. The pole master wrappers kind of method claim, again, I have not checked, that you can get as good a polar alignment as it can be. I frankly have no experience with either of them. So there are hundreds and hundreds of methods of polar aligning. If you go and just search on the Google, there will be pages and pages of results. This is one of the crux of long exposure, long focal length astrophotography. So two apps, I use the iOS one. It is good to have you to know if you're using a polar scope. So basically, this shows depending upon you choose the mount, you choose your location, and you choose your time. It knows already. It will show you where exactly the pole star should be in the polar scope of your mount with the exact reticle and the markers that you're supposed to see. So I find them pretty good. So if you're using one of the star trackers, you have to invest in one of these apps. Very sure. But even if not for those star trackers, probably you're using a mount with a polar scope, then also probably it's better to invest in these. PhD2, like I said, doubles up as a software for tools for and your guide scope and guide camera setup uh, for, for, for the software or the tool to use for polar alignment. It has 3 polar alignment routine built into this in the software. According to its documentation, and I've taken this from documentation, PhD2 manual itself. So it has something called static polar alignment, which has the lowest accuracy but very fast. There is something called polar drift alignment, which is a medium accuracy, reasonably quick, and it has a support for the classic drift alignment, which is, by the way, the only polar alignment technique that I know. That is the only thing that I have learned. That is the only thing I have practiced for the last 10 years. That is the only thing I do every time I go out. You can ask the Vishwa, Kirti, and everybody. I do drift alignment every single time I go out in the field. It takes 30 to 40 minutes, but that is the only thing I know. So, and that is the only thing I'm going to describe now. So, bear with me. So, the classic drift alignment is the most accurate, but it takes time. Recently, we went to Kurg and Vishwa can vouch for it. He did ASPA on a Celestron mount. And how much was the drift how much is the alignment error when you checked in
more than a degree actually.
Yeah, more than a degree ASPA. And then we brought it down to 0.2 arc minute, if I'm right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so using the classic drift alignment. Now, okay, before I go into...
There is a question,
yeah.
Suman, do we need to remove cone error during polar alignment?
What error?
Cone error.
What is the cone error? You mean orthogonality error?
Yeah.
I don't think so, no.
No, I mean, I can probably add one or two points. This can be compensated by changing that RA. I mean, this mainly happens during polar drift alignment or static polar alignment, or even when you are using pole master. So what happens is the telescope axis and the polar, the RA axis, they won't be parallel. So in that case, what you have to do is you have to rotate the tube almost 90 degrees or 60 degrees and then redo the same static polar alignment and polar drift alignment. And yeah, it will try to align the mount close to the polar axis.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter for the classic drift alignment,
no,
right?
It doesn't.
So which is why I do. So I do that. Over time I have read a lot of things, but nothing is more accurate than the time-consuming, sometimes boring drift alignment. Especially if you are on a long focal length, there is no going away from drift alignment. You need it to be really accurate, and especially if you're going to go for a very small arcsecond per pixel, near 1 or below 1, then yes, your requirement on guiding is really really stringent. Everything is difficult on a longer focal length. I mentioned that. So is the demand from your polar alignment accuracy. So let me go into and explain visually. There are a lot of maths involved in this, and why it is this way and that way. Frankly, I have forgotten my maths, so please don't ask me. Doctor is there. Doctor is, and a paid question is why it is so fast is in the celestial equator and etc. Uh, just take it from me. Why we do drift alignment on the celestial equator? Because the drift is fastest there. Don't ask me why. I can't explain those maths. I've forgotten. So let's say on the altitude. So I'm going to explain things in pictorially. So the solid line here is the way the stars are in the sky. So let's say the true NCP is here, and the dotted lines is where your telescope dick axis or telescope is pointing or mount is pointing. Okay, so either we are talking about altitude. Okay, so altitude error. So either you could be too high or you could be too low. Okay, let's take that you're too low. Okay, so then while the stars in the sky does not know that you have an error, so they are going to go on their path along the solid line, right? So this every star is going to rise in the east. I mean, it's going to track on the solid line. But since you are low, you're pointing lower than the NCP, your eyepiece or the sensor, camera sensor, is going to track along this dotted line. Okay, so now let's say we zoom into this area, and we are looking in the eastern horizon. South is towards our left, north is towards our right. Sorry, so south is towards the right, north is towards the left. I've forgotten my directions. So so the red is the axis where sorry, green is the axis where the stars would travel, that is the solid line here, and the red is the axis where your eyepiece will travel. Okay, so in other words, what you will see in your eyepiece, the star seems to be drifting south. Okay, I'm going to repeat again. So the green is the axis, the green is the path in which the star will actually travel. But because you are lower than the axis where you're supposed to be, your eyepiece is going to travel on this dotted line, that is the red line here. And because of that, the star would seem to be drifting south. So this is the if you're don't remember this theory, the most places will say just this much: if the star drifts south, axis is too far low. This is why. So if you keep this picture in mind, and you've forgotten the actual actual statement, you can derive the actual statement from the picture in mind. So essentially, for altitude, if you're looking at the eastern horizon in the northern hemisphere, star drift south means axis is too low. The opposite is true. If the star drifts north, axis is too high. Okay, which again you can look at by zooming in here. It's the same thing. Similarly for azimuth. So azimuth is either east or west of the, if you're pointing east of the NCP, this is how the star would go. So the stars would go on the red line, and your axis is pointing, which is green, towards east. So the star would appear to go south. If the star drifts south, the axis is too far east. Okay, so the combining this two in the drift alignment, the only thing that you need to remember is these three letters. This applies for northern hemisphere and eastern horizon. I'll tell you the differences that you have to make. You need to remember only three letters: S, E, and L. So for azimuth, if the star drifts south, that is the S, axis is too far east, And for the altitude, if the star drifts south, the axis is too low. So these three letters, if you remember, it does not matter where you, I mean, northern hemisphere, nothing else matters. So only thing now remains for you to find out, how do I know in my eyepiece where the star, the drift direction of the star is towards south or towards north. So that you can easily find out by pressing the hand button, hand controller button. You just press the north button. Of course, you should not be pressing so hard or so fast that star just goes out of the view. But if you press a little, the star would move, the north button, the star would move south. So that is the direction. If the star drifts, it is drifting south. Okay, so if you instead of eastern horizon, if you want to use western horizon for some reason, eastern horizon is cloudy, it's evening, there's cloud, etc. You need to reverse low high in this description. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you need to reverse north south in this description. So the drift alignment typically goes, you drift. If you're using a software, you measure the drift. That gives you visually and mathematically some representation. How much is the current error? Then you correct whichever axis you're correcting. Then you recenter or reacquire a star, and you again drift. Okay. So until there is no drift for 5 minutes, I mean, this 5 minutes is an absolute recommendation. You may, if you're only shooting for your exposures as only 3 minutes and long and etc. You may only say that, okay, I'm fine with if there is no drift for 3 minutes, which I often do. These days I'm shooting only for 3 minutes on exposure. So I only check for 3 minutes, no drift, I'm good. Okay. Now doing the same thing using PhD2. Like I mentioned, PhD2 has these 3 tools in itself. So from the tools button drop down, you can go and choose any of these 3. The classic drift alignment. I don't actually use the classic drift alignment tool as such, but I do in PhD2 without, because it pops up a lot of other dialogues, etc. All that dialogue is really not necessary. All that you have to do in PhD, first you have to calibrate. I'll explain the calibration part. You have to turn on the trend lines here. Instead of really going through the tools and the choosing the drift alignment tool, etc., and letting it tell you everything, all that is not really necessary. So you can calibrate, and after the calibration has started and it started guiding, you turn on the trend lines, turn off the corrections here, and make sure that your deck guiding is off. These are the 2 things that you need to do. The moment you turn on the trend lines, it starts showing the polar alignment error, and it start anyway the trend lines. It will start showing you the direction of the drift, or it starts showing you the drift. And plus, it starts showing this pink circle, which is basically the maximum polar alignment error. Mathematically, it is not the actual polar alignment error. Okay, so actually the PhD documentation and its tool description is wrong in that way, that it fails to say, it actually says that you have to correct, you have to bring the star on this line. That's not true. You should not be doing that. You might be overcorrecting. This is the maximum amount of error possible. This is not the actual amount of error. So sometimes you will see weird values like 60 degree. This is off by 60 degree, and you can eyeball and say that no, it cannot be 60 degree off from pole. So before we do this, there are certain things that you need to do. You need to calibrate, and you need to calibrate. You have to do that roughly aligned using any other method, like daytime eyeballing. You look at your polar scope and bring the star somewhere near, or you use ASPA to get it close, and then you start the drift alignment. So you calibrate near the intersection of celestial equator and meridian. You need to be really careful here. If you're going to use eastern horizon for altitude, then you need to calibrate slightly east of meridian. So that, and if you're going to use the western horizon for altitude, then you calibrate slightly west of the meridian. Then, of course, like I said, you turn off your dig guiding, um, turn on the train lines for altitude correction. Then you slew down either eastern or western. I prefer to do altitude first if it is clear and you can see the stars there. That's because the altitude gets darker fast. And actually, I reuse calibration from the previous night, which PhD offers. You can remember the calibrations, and next time you run the PhD, it will auto-load the calibration. So I don't really need to do the calibration unless I'm changing the direction. So because the eastern horizons becomes darker fast, um, I want to go and do the polar altitude correction as soon as it starts to get dark, as soon as I can see Sirius in the sky. So I would go to eastern horizon, and first I'll go to deck 0 and then slow down to eastern horizon and auto select star, guide, drift. So every time you select a star or do a tools auto select, it will select a star, and then you press the guide button, it will start guiding, and you watch the drift for some time. It will tell you how much is the error. Then you hit stop button and do the correction, and you will see the correction happening. Okay, so while you're correcting, don't go overboard and bring, definitely never cross this line. That's number 2. And don't listen to the PhD2 advice, which says that you need to bring the star on the line. Don't listen to that as well. So you can always go small step at a time. Um, as you go, become more polar aligned, this particular circle will become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and your corrections will also should become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Initially, the error will be very high. You can make big corrections, but as the line gets flatter and flatter and flatter, you need to be really careful. Otherwise, what happens is you end up doing overcorrections. Overcorrections in altitude is easy because it's one knob. Either you raise it or lower it, it's fine. But on azimuth, it's basically unscrewing one knob and tightening another knob. If you overcorrected, bringing it back means dealing with backlash, and it's really irritating. So the only thing with respect to what I described earlier with SEL rule is that how do I know which is south? Now here is in the latest version of PhD, there is actually a marker. It says guide north and guide east, two marker. So, but in the documentation of PhD2, it also says that this need not corresponds to the sky north and the sky south. So it's kind of confusing to me. So in order to find out which drift is south drift, either going down is south drift or going up is south drift, but the given configurations that you have, guide scope and the whether you're using OAG or your guide camera, whether it is mirroring or your optics has a diagonal because of it's getting flipped and all that, you need to find out which direction is south, which drift is south, going down is south or going up is south. Then you can do the correction as per this rule. Easiest way to do is purposely lower the mount. That's what I do. If I have forgotten or I have changed my stuff, because correcting the altitude is very easy. Remember, it's just lowering, and so if you have purposely lowering down, you can eyeball, and this is where the poster should be, and you lower it the mount. The first drift would be towards south, definitely eastern horizon, of course. That you need to remember. It will be always the south, and that will tell you, okay, fine. So if it's going down, that means it's south, or if it in your case it goes up, that direction drift is south. It will remain same even for azimuth. Any questions? Oh, what is the kind of polar alignment error should I settle for? If you're doing a long exposure, then it actually, if you do it right, it will. For example, here it is showing current polar alignment error. I don't know what kind of uh, settings it has used. In my case, for 2.97 arc minute, 3 arc minute nearly, the circle is not this big. Okay, so that's about polar alignment. We are 8:50. Any questions? Why everybody is silent?
There are only few people left, I believe, only 13.
Okay. Any questions? No. So, how much we have? We are here. We are about 90. So, shall we continue tomorrow or shall we continue today?
I guess we can continue tomorrow. It looks like
Same
there are
time?
pretty
There are,
important topics.
yeah. So, the major topics left now are about focusing. Then we have plate solving. Then we have the camera settings. Then you have auto guiding. We talked about auto guiding setup. This is the actual auto guiding, doing it in the field. And then we have dithering. Somebody asked a question about dithering. So we're going to talk about dithering. And we have taking flats, and that completes it. Then some references and stuff like that.
Okay, I think let's continue in a fresh session tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question.
Yeah.
You can ask as many questions. So we are continuing tomorrow. So we have free for questions.
Okay, okay. So when you are drift aligning,
Yeah.
would you do azimuth first or altitude first, or does it really matter?
Somewhere I read doing altitude first is recommended. Actually, the real rule says that you have to alternate between altitude and azimuth.
Okay.
Because, depending upon the mounts are never perfect. So you do altitude, whichever you do. You do altitude first and then you do azimuth. Then you have to go back to altitude and correct again, and then back to azimuth.
Okay, so
Till
that gets
there is
you.
no error. Till there is no error. But now.
So you're bang on what do you say, parallel with the celestial equator.
Yeah. So now that kind of algorithm you have to follow if you are going for a permanent setup.
Right.
Okay. Now, in case of mobile setup, and again, it depends on the kind of focal length. You're going to shoot at a 2000 mm focal length and at a very small arc second per pixel. Probably you have to go as accurate as is possible. But nobody shoots like that. But if you're going to have a permanent setup in which you're not going to do polar alignment every day, so it makes sense. Let's spend one damn night doing the polar alignment. Okay,
Right.
as close as possible. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So you're not going to touch permanent setup and remote observatory, for example. You can't really go there every day to. A lot of people have remote observatories and setups like that where they would have set up their equipment in a dome and everything is controlled remotely.
Okay.
So which one should I do? I usually do the altitude first, like I said. I want to start doing the polar alignment as soon as it starts getting dark, and if I can see Sirius in the sky, I start slewing. So I go to meridian first, deck 0. Sorry, celestial equator first. So I slew to deck 0. And then the moment I see the deck 0, the current deck is 0, and then I slew down to eastern horizon, if eastern horizon is available. If not, the sky is still not dark yet. So the western horizon is pretty bright.
Yes.
So in that case, I will do azimuth first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Any more questions?
May I know your name? Because it is showing Anthros Rising.
Yeah, this is me, Udayan.
Oh, it's Udan.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We are still open for questions. Do let me know. If not, yeah, we can conclude the session for today. Yeah, there is one question. What are the uses of encoders?
Encoders meaning?
Suman, you can unmute yourself and ask for it. Mount encoders.
Yeah, hi. Actually, there are some mounts which have these high precision encoders. What are they used for?
I mean, like the name says, they are high precision. That's all. So
I mean,
probably, typically there are gears and sub gears and stuff. I'm not a mechanically oriented person. Somebody with a knowledge can answer.
I can pitch in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead,
So,
Udayan.
high precision encoders will, they are meant for very high accuracy. They are meant for tracking. So with high precision encoders, you can go down to much lower periodic errors than what a regular mount would give you. And typically high precision encoders, when you're using them, you don't use guiding because they are basically the thing that they are so high, the precision is so high that you don't require auto guiding.
I would. There's some background sound coming from somewhere. So I would say the reason that we guide is not just because of periodic error. Okay, there are other reasons for which we guide. In case of even the guide error due to flex, in a Newtonian setup with a OAG, of course, can be handled using auto guiding. So the mount is one thing, and your equipment on top of the mount is another thing. Whether the guiding is not required with a encoder and etc. That's how they will always market. But should we be believing that in toto? I don't believe so. If I am, no matter what kind of mount I am using, if I'm going high focal length, I will always going to be guiding. Anything above 200 mm, I will be guiding.
Yeah, so I mean, when you are using a mount with high precision encoders, it is already understood that you have got yourself rid of flexure errors or you are at the lowest possible flexure error.
How do you ensure that?
No, this is again the hardware you're using, the mounting system you're using.
The flex is not from the mount. Flex is in your optical system plus camera.
Right. So how you couple it to the mount will determine how much flexure you have, right?
Not really. Mount and the entire setup coupling is only one. There is this D-type or whatever and the screw. That's it done. But what about your mirror moving?
In case of Newtonians, yes, it is a problem. That I will agree to that. Yes.
In case of any other also, I mean, it all depends on if you are using side by side in a reflector, and the refractor is not an 80 mm scope, rather a 150 mm scope. It's a huge and big and let's say you put a piggybacked guide scope. There are several rings and screws and knobs and stuff. So and everything gets pulled down by gravity in a different way with the different forces. The gravity will put G on it, but on everything, but they have different masses, so they will get
they will move
on
yes.
different ways.
Yes,
so you could have flex even if you're ultimately enter rig over your mount, that joint is solid. So I'll go back to why we need guiding. Where did we describe that? So periodic error and mount tracking is two of the reasons, but there are other reasons because of which we use guiding. Polar misalignment, for example.
Right.
No amount of encoders is going to solve you for that. No amount of tracking. So you have to be polar aligned, you have to be polar aligned. Let's say you put 600 mm scope or 2000 mm scope on top of encoder enabled mount. So let's say you don't have no tracking errors, you have no periodic error, but it could still be polar misaligned. Right, and atmospheric reflections could still be there. Let's say you're shooting Eta Carina from Bangalore at this latitude, it's at so low. So then things could still be, needs to be tracked.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we have Ajay Talwar also on the call. Ajay, you were mentioning something on encoders.
First, hi to Ajay Talwar.
Oh,
Nice to see you here.
yeah, he is not on microphone apparently.
Ajay, can you hear us?
He can, but he is not on microphone, so he
Oh.
can't speak to us.
Okay. You can send us by mail, you can reply.
Yeah.
Reply to this thread on BAS mailing list.
Okay, 1 minute. He's getting a mic.
So tomorrow we will be talking about focusing, and then we'll be talking split solving, and then we'll be talking typical camera settings. Then auto guiding using PhD2, we'll just go deep into it. And then we're talking about dithering and taking flats. And that is the end of it. Kirti was there, right? But Kirti left, is it?
Yes, Kirti left in between.
Stop share. And then how do I?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay, Ajay. I can read you an answer. So basically, Ajay was telling. So encoders are typically good for go-to scopes. Rather than as an alternate for guiding. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We can conclude the call.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We'll continue the call.
Yes, we will continue this tomorrow at the same time. Same time tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send out an invite.
Yeah. Okay.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined.
Thanks, Subhankar.
Thank you.